Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm tackling a common practice that I think is holding a lot of C# code bases and developers back, creating an interface for every single class and service. Interfaces can be a powerful tool, but when we treat them as a default thing to add instead of a tool, we end up with bloated code bases, difficult navigation, and unnecessary complexity. Let's talk about why it's time to stop. I can't count how many code bases I've seen where every service, no matter how trivial, comes with its own interface. Let's consider a simple internal-only class that doesn't rely on any external data or services, just pure logic. Here we have a calculator that simply adds two numbers. There are no external calls, no file system interactions, and no special configuration. Yet we both have a calculator as well as the iCalculator interface. What value is the iCalculator interface providing to us? Unless we plan to swap in another calculator implementation, which, let's be honest, is highly unlikely, what value is this adding other than just adding additional clutter? Ask yourself, if we ever do change calculator's implementation, are we realistically going to keep both versions around? Even if we decide to introduce a second implementation someday, we could just add the interface at that point. Until then, this interface only adds complexity to a straightforward piece of logic. By insisting every class have an interface, you double the number of types you have to understand. Also, when a teammate tries to navigate the code, some IDEs prompt go to definition, e.g. the interface, or go to implementation, the concrete class. Others might default to taking you to the interface, forcing you to take an extra step or use an additional keyboard shortcut to actually reach the code that matters. This seemingly small friction adds up, slowing you down and making even simple maintenance tasks more tedious. Don't get me wrong, interfaces aren't all evil. They are useful when you need multiple implementations. For example, let's say you have a movie provider that fetches data from an external API in production, but for testing, you want a quick and controlled data source. In that scenario, having an interface is valuable. In this case, the iMovie provider interface allows you to plug in the external API movie provider at runtime, but easily swap it with a fake movie provider when running integration tests, demos, or local dev, without network dependencies. Here, the interface brings clear value. The same logic applies if you're writing a library consumed by others. They might need to swap in their own data sources, and providing an interface makes that easy. The key point, interfaces are tools for flexibility. Use them intentionally where you actually have or anticipate multiple implementations, not by default. Unfortunately, I've seen developers often force interfaces where they don't belong. I've seen a real life scenario where someone tried to refactor a large 3,000 lines view model to be more manageable. They extracted a piece of logic related to restoring the view model to a state based on some saved state in a database. State decided to move all of this logic into a view model restorer. Sound good, right? It was, but along the way they introduced two new interfaces. iViewModel Restorer for the restorer, and worse, an iViewModel interface just so the restorer could indirectly work on the original viewmodel's data without exposing any private and protected members as public. Since the restorer needed to touch about 25 points in the original viewmodel, they decided to abstract pretty much the entire viewmodel behind this new iViewModel interface. In the end, the main view model was reduced by about 100 lines of code, but they introduced three new types and added a net 300 lines of code overall to the codebase. That's not simplification, that's complication. It's not really decoupling the ideas of restoring state and representing state. It's just spreading complexity around and behind an abstraction of interfaces. Now there's an interface for the view model that will never have a second implementation, and a view model restorer that won't realistically be replaced either. Every time you add a new bit of state, you're going to have to change the view model to add that state. You're going to have to update the interface to be able to restore that state, and then the restorer is going to have to go and update that state. Instead of embracing these unnecessary interfaces, it would be better to accept that the view model and the view model restorer work closely together. They are inherently coupled together. The complexity comes from the order and detail of how the restore logic runs due to the reactive or interactive elements in the view model. Introducing interfaces in this scenario doesn't help. It just obscures what's really going on. Keep them concrete and work with the real implementations directly. In your end-user application, start with concrete classes. Only introduce an interface when the real need arises, like a second implementation. By doing this, you keep your code simpler and more direct. Instead of iCalculator, just have calculator. Instead of iViewModel, just use your viewmodel directly. It will make your code cleaner, easy to maintain, and you haven't lost any capabilities. Many developers say, but I need interfaces to mock my classes in unit tests. Sure, sometimes you do when there's external dependencies, but often you can and actually should test with real classes or very lightweight fakes. If you really need to swap out a dependency for tests, that's when you introduce an interface, not before, but I'll probably put a video more about it later. By reducing unnecessary interfaces, you gain a few key benefits: fewer types to reason about, less cognitive overhead, easier onboarding, faster refactoring, and cleaner tests as there should be less mocking. In the end, interfaces are a powerful tool in our belt, but like all tools, they're best used with intention. Don't create them just because you can or you've been told to. Start simple and only add interfaces when you truly need the flexibility. Your codeways will be leaner, cleaner, and easier for everyone to work with, and everyone's going to thank you later. What's your take on interface overuse? Let's chat in the comments. Like and subscribe for more practical C# tips.